So we all know the story of David and Goliath, one of the most recognizable stories in the Bible. Maybe even if you don't consider yourself a follower of Jesus, you know this story. And so how do we defeat the Goliath, the giants in our life? Let's hear from our pastor, Ryan Nunn, as he kind of unpacks that question.
Have you ever been sitting down watching a Marvel movie? Like, and you watch Captain America or Iron Man or something, one of those type of characters running around just defeating evil, just having these huge victorious wins, and maybe even coming from these really terrible failures and things that they had done wrong or bad things that had happened to them, but they always end up victorious and they always win. Like, you can't help it but win. I know when I watch those, what I'm really good at, like, I feel like my brain has the ability to place myself in the midst of that story. Like, I imagine what it would be like to be this genius, philanthropist, innovator, this billionaire guy who could create this robotic system that was incredible enough to be bulletproof, right? Number one, but also to fly you around without any real aerodynamics anywhere. It's kind of crazy to imagine, but I can do it. I can work really hard, and I can imagine what it's like for me to be the hero of that story. And so, as I think about and process through the stories that are in the Bible, I almost tend to do the same thing. You know, whether we're talking about Moses, the story in the Old Testament, taking God's people out of Egypt, and I imagine myself being Moses saying, let's go, and running, I can't help but do that. Or even if, talking about David and Goliath, which we're talking about today, I can't help but imagine what it would be like to be what I perceived as a little kid who's stepping up against this 9 or 10 foot giant. And everything in everybody's reasonable brain would say that this is going to end very badly for David. It's going to be a really bad situation for David, but he wins. He comes back victorious. This huge win, and everybody's screaming and celebrating David, and the Philistines are running off scared. The bad guys are running away scared, and it's just this huge win. I can imagine myself in the midst of that story. You see, when we read the Bible, a lot of times what we do is we like to read ourselves into the scripture. We like to read ourselves into that story. And that's all well and good. You read a story like David and Goliath, to where you have this little shepherd boy who gets sent with food to the front lines of a battle to kind of give these warriors and these infantry type people their sustenance, give them some bread, give them some water, things of that nature. And then he winds up being this little kid defeating this huge giant. I can't help but identify with that story. And I can't help but walk away thinking, man, okay, so if I'm David and I got my problem in front of me, or whatever this big mountain the thing is in front of me, you know what? I need to pull up my bootstraps, period. And then I need to go grab my weapon of choice, and David's was a stone, and I'm going to kill this giant standing in front of me. Yeah, we can do that. And I don't know that that's a terrible thing to do, but here's what I know, is that when we read an ancient document like the Bible, it's important that we understand kind of the original intent or the original, what we call context, or things happening around this time in history. It's important that we know that. It's important that we know who the audience is supposed to be, and it's important that we know a little bit about the author. Now, this specific story is found in 1 Samuel chapter 17. It's in the front half of your Bible. I'm going to let you find that. Maybe we'll have a link in the description below to where you can read it on your own. It's kind of a long passage, going to warn you, a long story, going to warn you ahead of time. But when we read in Samuel, we have to understand who was Samuel as the author accredited for this works, and what was going on around David. Now, there are some resources out there to learn more. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, but I do know it's important that we understand who the audience was, who they're writing to, and what would they have heard or what would they have read whenever they were reading this scripture. Here's a hint. Most people in that day, a lot of people in that day could not read. So maybe it would have been more of a heard type thing. I don't know that for sure, but what would they have heard? What would have been the ideas that they take away from this story? And then in that particular moment, we can come to today, and then we can kind of interpret what the intent for this story is for us today. And I know that sounds like a whole lot of work, and we're not going to do all of that work again today. But here's what I want us to do, is I want us to take a look at this story of David and Goliath as an example of how to approach other stories that we might read in the Bible. Right? My goal in life is to help people read the Bible and help them approach it from an appropriate way. And so this story specifically, a lot of times what we hear, there's three main characters. You've got the Philistines and Goliath. We'll put them together. They're kind of the bad guys of the story. They're the evil ones, or the godless people of the story. They represent a people group that defies the living God. Like you hear David use some of that language, like, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Essentially, they represent godless people. The Israelites, David was an Israelite, the army as a whole represent God's people. Now, I think we've said this in a few videos before, but it's important to be reminded that God's people had been given a specific way and been given specific direction on how to live out the nature and character of our God. It's important to note that God's people have entire books of the Bible helping them understand how to interact in certain situations, understand how do we live amongst the presence of a holy God. Like, those are interesting, kind of different questions, but that's a real thing. God, how do they interact with one another? Like, who makes things right whenever relational breakdowns happen? They had books of the Bible dedicated to how to do this. And then here's another thing that happens, is that God places them at the center of the ancient world, the ancient Near East, so that everybody that travels around that area comes into contact with the people that know how to live out God's nature and God's character. Okay, so that's really important contextually for you to understand and for me to understand and be reminded of. Now, this story specifically, David is going to be the third character. And historically, I think what I've been taught is that, you know what, like Goliath is godlessness and represents sin, and David kind of represents me, right? And then the stones represent my mechanism by which I destroy this sin so that I can get back to living out this godly lifestyle, or whatever you want to call that. But here's what I want to pose to you. I want you to reflect on your life, just for a minute, on times of your life to where you were completely overrun with doing things that you know aren't what's best for you. You're overrun with unhealthy behaviors, or you're overrun with unhealthy relationships. All the things, those types of things that the Bible calls or considers sinful. And then I want you to go back and reflect on how you interacted with that. Has it always been a super successful way of you grabbing your mechanism and throwing it at it and trying to kill that sinful behavior, if you will? If you're anything like me, I'd say that the answer is no. I say that more like what it is I'll do these things and I'll try to stop doing whatever it is that I'm trying to stop doing, and I'll have these mechanisms. I'll read my Bible more, or I'll do more yoga, or whatever it might be, and I'll try to kill this thing that happens, and then ultimately months or whatever later, I'll kind of end up back there, living in the same behaviors as I was before, that I had already thought I killed. So it's remarkable how much more we tend to resemble the Israelites. Now, they don't get talked about, the army, the Israelite army. They don't get talked about a whole lot. But you got to remember, David and Goliath were out here, and then the Philistines were over here, and then the other army was over on this other side of the ravine. And none of them would come fight. The whole point of the story of David, why everybody was so enthralled and why they were there to begin with, was Goliath had challenged every individual warrior that Israel had, and none of the warriors would go fight it because they were scared. And then David comes in, full of this weird faith kind of thing that it's hard for us to identify with, and he handles his business. So does David really resemble you and I whenever we're wrestling through things like sin and death? I think the answer is no. You see, because the rest of the Israelite army was still over here afraid of Goliath. They were now, instead of being afraid of what Goliath might do to them, they were probably afraid of what Goliath was going to do to David. He would have been a small, good-looking kid, he would have been small, but he still would have been a teenager. So the Israelites would have been over here cowering in fear, if you will. So knowing and understanding how this works kind of paints a bit of a different picture. All of a sudden, David doesn't start to resemble us as much as the Israelites. So we're scared of how to interact with sin and death. Well, this is going on in my life. How do I interact with it? What do I do? And that gets us to the holistic message of the Bible anyway. And it's what we in the church call the gospel or the good news of Jesus. You see, that goes something like this. I'm going to paraphrase it. Is that Jesus came here so that we could be in right standing with a holy God. Here's what I mean by that. Is that God created this world in perfection. We stepped into sin, willingly stepped into sinfulness, kind of fractured all of reality, so much so that the whole idea of sin and death entices us so much that the only way to really make that right and to satisfy this wrath, if you will, or this justice, sense of justice that comes with God, was by having a worthy enough sacrifice or a worthy enough person or thing that's willing to step into that gap so that we can stand, so that we can be in the presence of this holy God, so we can be in relationship with this holy God. Jesus steps into that, to the very thing that we struggle with, to the very thing that we wrestle with all the time. Jesus steps into it once and for all, makes this play, sin and death, ultimately disappear to where we no longer have to walk as slaves, as the Bible would say, to sin, but we can walk with this newfound hope, with this newfound joy, with this newfound mercy. And we no longer have to be afraid. We no longer have to live in fear because Jesus won the battle that we've been trying to fight for our entire life. Now you look at that reality of the gospel or the good news, and then we look at the story of David and Goliath, and David all of a sudden starts to look a lot more like this other character that came and did the very thing that we never could, or maybe we just weren't willing to. David comes and steps into the very thing that we cower in fear over, and he wins, and he dominates, and he does exactly what he said he was going to do. And all of Israel was saved, and sin and death was left without anything to hold over God and his people. When we think about these Bible stories, there has to be a little bit more on the table than just it being about you and I in our lives and how do we be better people. I would say that stories like this are meant to highlight the nature and character of our God through the work that Jesus has done for all of us. So maybe when we read these stories like David and Goliath, maybe we look on the hunt, or we go on the hunt, or we be on the lookout, if you will, for ways that this can remind us of who Jesus is. The ways that these can remind us of the character and nature of our God and the goodness and the saving nature that comes with knowing him.
Okay, so I have to admit, the first time that I heard this story in this way, it sort of shattered all my paradigms about the David and Goliath story that I always grew up with. Maybe that's you. Maybe this is the first time that you're kind of identifying with the Israelites, kind of scared in the background and understanding that maybe you're not the hero of the story. You're hiding behind Jesus or behind David. And so I know that me personally, I tend to kind of wrestle with some of the same giants in my life, some of the same representatives of sin and death. And maybe that's you. Maybe you're wrestling with some of those things right now. I would encourage you, the first next step is just to identify what those things are. And once you've identified those things, just take actual intentional steps towards resting in the reality that Jesus has already won the battle. Maybe that means you need to put people around you who can help you navigate that. Maybe you just need to reach out to us. We would love to help you navigate that. And until next time, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue to trust and follow Jesus together.